If you've driven the Hume, Calder, or the Pacific Highway in Victoria, you may have seen what looks like rope ladders strung across the road for possums. They're not decoration, they're part of a global push to help wildlife survive in a world sliced up by roads and development. And today's guest is one of the people behind them. Associate Professor Dr Rodney is a world leader in road ecology and urban biodiversity, working from Victoria to Africa on how humans and wildlife can coexist. I'm Ian Bunston. Welcome to Monday Matters. Welcome, Rod. Great to have you back again and to have a chat this morning.
Oh, thanks, Ian. It's good to be here.
Rod, let's talk about roads and wildlife.
Mm.
You've worked on wildlife crossings from Kenya, as I said in the introduction, to Hume Highway in Australia,
Yes.
to do possum bridges and other type of structures.
Yeah.
Do they actually work?
Here's something I prepared earlier. Yes, they do, Ian. I guess one of the big issues we've got with roads and other linear infrastructure is it stops animals getting from one side to the other. And just like we need to go from our house to the shops, wherever we need to go, so do animals. And so when we build this infrastructure and they can't get across, or they get killed while they're getting across, that's a big problem, for the individual animals, but also just more broadly, the animal and plant community. So we build these structures and they get used. So it was quite interesting this was one of the first that we installed across the Hume Freeway. This is near Longwood, so just an hour and a half north of Melbourne. We built it in about 2010, 2011, and people thought it was a joke. So when the tender went out for the construction, actually went out not intentionally, but on April Fool's Day. And so the construction companies thought it was a big joke, building these bridges across the highway for possums. But we've installed hundreds of these now across Australia, and in fact, in some of the places where we've installed them, one of the ones around Warburton, just into the forest near Warburton, for Leadbeater's possum, which is Victoria's faunal emblem. The day we installed the bridge across an existing road, they used it that night. So it's incredible how much these things get used. And I've got a few photos, if I can I'll quickly share this. So we've built heaps of them now, all different kinds of sizes and shapes. So not just canopy bridges for possums, but this is across the Calder Freeway, this top left corner, a bridge bigger than it needs to be. We've got underpasses of different sizes and shapes, and increasingly we're starting to build overpasses where we actually have a bridge and we put soil on it, and then we grow vegetation, and a whole range of animals use them. We're still not quite to the same scale as some of the work in India. So this was a project I visited. And they've got multiple sort of viaducts that are now like a kilometre and a half long for elephants and tigers to go underneath. And lots of, like, hundreds of different species of animals are now using these underpasses and overpasses across Australia. We've got species from Europe, North America. And that's the example of the rope bridge. We've also got these poles. So some animals glide from, like a sugar glider. They land on these poles and they jump to the other side. And again, lots of marsupials and gliders and families of possums. We've even had some goannas crossing the bridge across the Hume. And also, obviously, the cockies love it.
Rod, this is fascinating
As do
work.
elephants. Yep.
Fascinating. How do you actually decide the location where you're going to put these structures?
So we do a bit of research. Well, in some places, like this example on the Hume in my background, I'll stop sharing at this for now. We'll do that up here. This example of the Hume in my background, the only place where trees are left is where other road reserves come in perpendicular to the highway, and so that's where the animals are moving towards the freeway and then are trying to get across. So that's the obvious spot. When there's no other habitat, put it where there is. Other locations, rivers and waterways are important because we're building a bridge or a culvert anyway, so we can make that just a little bit bigger. And other locations where there might be like a farm dam on one side and grassland on another side, and then the kangaroos are crossing from the forest, crossing the road to get to the dam or the food. So that's sort of where we target where the animals are either living or moving.
Now, Rod, is there a chance that predators could actually be waiting for some of these animals? I mean, they're pretty
Yeah.
obvious as they're
Yep.
walking across or climbing across.
Yeah, yeah. So if I had a dollar or even 10 cents for every time someone asked this or whatever, I would be very wealthy now. But there's
That's
been
why you asked.
studies.
Is that why you asked me to ask the
That's
question?
right, because I can add it to the bill. Um, no, so if you've seen, if you're an ABC watcher and the comedy satirical Utopia, there's actually an episode where they build an underpass and then they get some visitors from Japan who want to see the highway and they realize that all the frogs or something have been eaten by foxes before the esteemed guests come on site. That's quite funny. But the answer is no. So yes, predators will also use them. And in fact, in North America, and with cougars and bears and wolves and stuff, we want the predators to use them as well. And if the predator's there when the prey is there, they will of course have a go. But there's no evidence from around the world, from hundreds of studies, to suggest that predators just sit and waiting for the animals to come across. So
Okay.
the animals will change the time of day when they use it to avoid the predators. A whole range of tactics there.
Mm. So moving to like the idea that we're driving through rural Victoria or anywhere in Australia, often we'll see dead animals on the side of the road.
Yeah, yep.
So what's the roadkill like data in Australia?
So compared to the rest of the world, we don't have a really good understanding of how many animals are getting killed on our roads. We estimate somewhere around 4 million marsupials, so things like kangaroos and wallabies and bandicoots, and about 6 million birds. So that's about 10 million mammals and birds, but that doesn't include reptiles, it doesn't include frogs, doesn't include invertebrates. Globally, so we've just finished a project, or just about to finish a project where we've pulled together data from about 200 different studies, and we've calculated the average rates of roadkill and then multiplied that by the length of roads. We estimate almost 15 billion vertebrates, so that's billion with a B, getting killed across the globe each year. And that's about 24 million tons of vertebrate. So we're not even including insects, which are the most numerous groups of animals on the planet. We're talking animals just like us with backbones. So yeah, it's vastly the greatest cause of mortality that we
Yeah.
have on animals.
So Rob, begs the question then, is there
Mm.
data or research on the impact then of these structures and taking a dent on that number?
Well, we do. We see when we build crossing structures and we combine them with fences. So we need a method to keep the animals off the road. So fences is the best way to do that, but there's other techniques. But when we have the fences and we have the crossing structures, we can reduce mortality of the target species almost down to zero,
Hmm.
like 90% reductions in mortality as a result of building these structures.
Hmm.
Mm.
So Rod, just turning to urban ecology, you also work in this area,
Yep.
urban ecology. What does that actually mean in plain English?
So urban ecology is pretty simply just nature in the city, if is a simple way of thinking about it. Any nature and any city and town. So the places where we live and work and we go and visit, and that can range from the city centre, so the CBD of Melbourne, which is where I did a fair bit of work, all the way out to, you know, the urban fringe, like I don't know, Pakenham or Melton or, anywhere else, even small cities and towns.
Okay, then. So in terms of biodiversity in
Mm.
cities, and you're touching on this, how did what impact does that have on our health and well-being?
Yeah, so it's pretty obvious now that, and there's a whole vast of research across a whole range of fields like, um, well, human health. So uh, temperatures in cities are much higher, like potentially up to 7 degrees warmer in the middle of the city compared to rural areas just outside the city. So from an urban heat island effect, heat stress during hot days, it matters. Connection to nature. So people feel calmer, more relaxed. There's a reason we have plants in city offices. It's because it makes us more productive. If you're in a hospital and you're overlooking a green space through your window, if you're lucky enough to have a window in your hospital bedroom, um, you will heal faster than the person with the same condition in a room without a window or where the window looks out on the adjacent roof of another building. So there is clear evidence now that connection to nature is really important for our health and well-being across a whole range of different metrics that we can measure.
Very interesting indeed. And I'm
Mm.
diverging a tiny bit, but my understanding is some of our local councils here in Melbourne have done work on the level of shade across their
Yeah,
site.
they have many, in fact, probably most of the metropolitan councils, so 30 odd councils across Melbourne, they've all been involved in the urban forest project. Melbourne's, I think it's Metropolitan Forest Project or something. But basically, the more trees and shade you can have in the city, in your suburb, it will reduce the temperature. It will provide some of those well-being and mental health benefits. It can improve or increase the value of your house. If you have a large established tree out the front of your house, that will increase the value of your house. It will decrease the cooling costs in summer. Um, I could go on, but there's lots and lots of benefits and value for us to keep as much nature as we can where we live.
So all of our Monday Matters viewers are going to be out there the
Bit of
after this
planting this
program.
afternoon, some guerrilla gardening. Why not? Mm.
Rod, just moving on a tiny bit, can you tell us about the discovery of the grassland earless dragon? Apparently, this is an
Yeah.
extraordinary story.
So the Victorian grassland earless dragon it's about 10 centimeters long, and some of my colleagues from work were doing some pre-construction sort of surveys in some grassland west of Melbourne. And so keeping in mind that native grasslands, which were like primarily west of Melbourne, there's less than 2% remaining. So we've turned it into houses and farmland now. So in that 2% that remains, it's obviously really important, but this grassland earless dragon, this tiny little guy, hasn't been seen for more than like 50 years. We haven't, no confirmed records of this species anywhere. My colleagues were out doing surveys in this I've got to say, pretty crappy bit of grassland west of Melbourne, not even pristine or anything like that. And they came across them. They thought, we were doing surveys for reptiles before they build houses, and they said, not sure what this little thing is. I've never seen it before. And it's a rediscovery of this thing that we haven't seen for 50 plus years. And it's one of the most, I think as an ecologist or biologist, we wanted to either discover a new species or rediscover something that we thought was extinct. So these kind of Lazarus species, if you like, um, it's one of the most, not that I was involved, I was sitting in the office that day, unfortunately, but my colleagues went out and happened to find them.
And just generally the impact that they will have on our environment.
So these guys are actually very little because they're quite small, but they're an important species because it's the last of their kind, um, and it will have an impact because it will protect the habitat around it. So this area would have just been turned into houses, but now they're purchasing the land, making a reserve for these species. There's a whole bunch of work going on at the zoo to breed them in captivity and raise extra populations.
Okay. I
Mm.
want to turn to energy transition. Rod,
Mm.
Australia's energy transition is accelerating. We're seeing it in the media every second day. Wind farms, solar farms, big batteries.
Yep.
Where do ecologists fit into that whole picture?
Yeah, so we could save the planet and destroy it at the same time. So we can move to renewable energy, but where we put those renewable energy projects and where we build the transmission lines to connect them can have a major impact on the sort of, I guess, the net positive outcome of that. So when there's proposals to build any of that infrastructure, we will go in and do pre-construction surveys and just look at the potential impact of that project on whatever the biodiversity is at that location. And we can also work on how do we minimize impacts and avoid them, And for anything that we can't avoid, can we mitigate them somehow? So in the mitigation sense, that might be like a transmission line, might be 100 meters wide, clearing through the forest. How do we get the animals across that clearing if they don't like going out into open areas? So yeah, we can come up with a whole range of avoid, minimize, mitigate strategies to try and
So is
improve it.
there something you can recall as an example where it has been a real advantage?
Um, I think the way we've built things in the past, it needs to change. Like we can't build things the way we have done for the past 100 years. Just go in, build whatever we want, wherever we want it. So now we're choosing areas that have the least environmental impact, but still achieve the goals of the project. So instead of putting, large batteries or wind farms necessarily in, important biodiversity areas, we can place them outside those areas. And it
Hmm.
can have a positive benefit. There's still impacts. Look, I mean, birds and bats can still collide with wind farms, but there's ways of like if the wind farm is in an area where the birds or the bats are flying through at sunset, we can slow down the turbines at sunset, um, or we can stop things operating at certain times of the year. So, not saying there is no impact, but we can reduce the impact quite significantly.
Now, Rod, over the years that I've known you, we've had some fascinating conversations, and I've always been really fascinated by the project that you are
Mm,
instrumental in the Botanic Gardens here in Melbourne. Can you
yeah.
briefly just, give us a
You love
description?
that story, don't
I
you, Ian?
love it. Yeah.
So the grey-headed flying fox, something that I'm not familiar with, but Ian is because of the grey hair on his head there. Yep, lovely. Um,
Thank you
so I
for
was,
pointing that out.
yeah, it's just between friends, no one
Yeah.
else on the call. So the grey-headed flying fox, it's a large fruit bat, weighs about a kilo, its wingspan of about a meter. They arrived in the Botanic Gardens in the early 80s, 1980s. And that was fine for a few years until the numbers built up and maybe 30, 40,000 flying foxes all sleeping in the Botanic Garden. So they're hanging in the trees during the day and they were killing the trees. And so the project, I mean, I just finished uni. This is my first job. Um, and I had to come up with and I was working at the Botanic Gardens. And my job was to try and figure out a way to get rid of the bats from the Botanic Gardens without harming the bats. And essentially, we came up with a whole bunch of different noises that we could play from CDs. So those little I guess we're all mostly of a vintage that knows about CDs and things
And
like
so
that.
just to jump in, Rod,
Yeah.
what gave you the clue to be using music or sound?
Yeah. So, well, we had tried a whole bunch of other things. So people came and said if you use ultrasonic noise, the grey-headed flying foxes will leave. Grey-headed flying fox hearing range is the same as ours. Pretty much, we can't hear ultrasonic, neither can the flying foxes. Helium balloons in the thing float them around, but they got entangled in the trees. Capsicum spray on the branches, but by the time we got up to spray the branches with a cherry picker, um, the flying foxes had already flown away anyway, and it was on the branches. We didn't spray it on the bats. A whole range of things. So the only options left were we tried smoke, but that's really hard in a botanic gardens in the middle of the city. Um, anyway, the only things left were noise. I tested some noises in a speaker. The bats flew away, and I said to the director, "Come down. We've got some noises that work." I played the noise from this speaker up in the canopy of the forest there in the gardens, and the bats didn't move. And the director was standing next to me. It's like, oh no, this is my first job, and I've stuffed it up. The bats aren't moving. But the speaker had a rope hanging on it, so in kind of this desperation, I pulled on the rope. The speaker turned around, and the noise came from different directions, and it was moving. And then the bats flew away again. So we realized it's a combination of the noise, loud, obnoxious, banging noises, plus the movement. Um, so we put the noise on a CD and played it from the back of a golf buggy, drove around the gardens, and eventually, long story short, they moved to Yarra Bend.
Love that story. And
Yep.
what a good way to start out in your career.
Yeah.
That's
Couldn't
great.
get any worse. Couldn't get any worse.
So going to a personal level, why this
Mm.
whole field? What's behind, driving you to be involved? in this area?
Yeah. It's a really good question, Ian. I, I when I was young, my dad, we always went camping at Wilson's Prom, in the national park there, and we did lots of bushwalking there. And I always had, a bit of an outdoor affinity, I suppose. I still do, obviously. And then I wanted to become a ranger, and then I did like a university degree in environmental science, and then they said, "Why don't you do an honours degree?" I said, "What's that?" So I did, and then I that finished, and they said, "Why don't you do a PhD and study ecology?" And I said, "What's that?" So that's another 5 years of research out there, and so I did that, and I kind of just fell into it in a way, this career. But I don't know. I feel personally that like that's the career aspect, but the motivation for me is to try and leave something better behind and to try and reduce our impacts because I think we have a responsibility to look after the planet, look after biodiversity, look after the plants and the animals, not only for me, like for me to enjoy, but also for my kids and grandkids one day maybe, and also just for the planet's sake. Like that Victorian grassland earless dragon, it's 10 centimeters. You know, you could say, what economic value does that lizard have, or what social value? But it has a right to exist because, they just do. It's part of nature, it's part of biodiversity, and I think we've got a responsibility to look after it. That's
Well,
ultimately it. Hmm.
yeah. Well, Associate Professor Dr. Rodney van der Ray is a world leader in road ecology and urban biodiversity, working on how humans and wildlife can coexist. Been a fascinating conversation this morning, Rod. Thanks for being a guest here at Monday Matters.
A pleasure. Thanks very much.